Good evening, everyone. I call to order the September meeting of the San Francisco Elections Commission. Today is Wednesday, September 20th, 2017, and the time is now 6:02 p.m. I am President Jordanek. Secretary Chan, can you take the roll?
President Jordanek.
Here.
Vice President Paris.
Here.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Here.
Commissioner Jung.
Here.
Commissioner Mogi. Not here. Commissioner Rowe. Not present. Commissioner Savant. Here. You have a quorum.
And Commissioner Mogi has an excused absence today, and Commissioner Rowe has told me that she is going to be arriving late today. And we also have with us Director John Arntz and Deputy City Attorney Joshua White. Next agenda item.
Item number 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the Election Commission's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
I wish to ask the Commission about this 1993 document that has been bothering me. Pursuant to a public records request into the Board of Equalization, searching for information about the San Francisco County Public Finance Authority from the November 2016 ballot handbook, which the city attorney says does not exist. A signed copy is on file with the Board of Supervisors. The Department of Elections ignored my sunshine request to see the original of this document. At first glance, the obvious mistakes could arise from cloning, the wrong day, the wrong number for the Board of Supervisors room, the wrong type of election. But I ask, is this type of sloppiness characteristic of Jermaine Wong? I also ask the Commission why she left her name off the statement of vote, the only time she ever did so. I urge attention to this text. The canvass was conducted in the manner required by Division 12 of the California Elections Code. In 1993, there were 11 divisions exactly. I ask how 5% of the voters who bothered to show up to task themselves forever in a single item ballot voted both. In some precincts, exceeding 42%. I ask whether this was known to the city attorney's office and whether this was of concern to the department. In my brief time, I cannot elaborate my research and concerns, but this election benefited many individuals who are still in government, and modern techniques based on Benford's Law may provide some answers. Reminding the Commission the vote-o-matic system is still used in Los Angeles County, I ask if the Commission was aware the vote-o-matic was developed by City College trustee Bob Varney, who originally owned the company, and who later pushed the City College's 2005 bond measure, along with John Whitehurst. I inquire of the Commission if Barbara Carr is of any relation to Computer Election System Chief Programmer of Assembly Code Stephen Carr, who designed the code used in the counting machines in Los Angeles County. Also benefiting from this election was Kevin Shelley, advised by Deputy City Attorney Randy Riddle. I remind the Commission Shelley would help launder Help America Vote Act funds earmarked to replace Los Angeles County's vote-o-matic system. I ask if the Commission was aware of the 2014 Massachusetts Inspector General report concerning former City College Chancellor Evan DeBell, who was also the former treasurer of the DNC. It involved his extensive abuse of public funds over 3 decades, and it detailed his close associates through the Bohemian Club, including Mr. Bob Varney and many other individuals highly influential in San Francisco, California, and national government. I thank you for your time considering these questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just one quick question for the speaker. Are those copies submitted someplace that we can view them?
I can leave them all with the
Secretary.
Secretary.
Please, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. I don't know if this will fit in to an agenda item tonight, but I did note that the Phase 1 has been awarded, and just as a general statement, we expect now at this point, as we move forward with the open source election system project, that there will be, again, interesting players showing up to make statement and perhaps misdirect your attention. We're noticing as the California Association of Voting Officials that we're receiving what we would call incoming fire right now. There's groups that are purporting, that are utilizing the acronym CAVO and NAVO, and this has apparently been directed at us by an employee from the company Oracle, and so we're expecting this kind of issue to continue, and so we're very sensitive, and we hope you are sensitive to the fact that if the Texas projects and the Los Angeles projects are any indication, that now you will start seeing people that are closely associated with Microsoft and Oracle showing up to misdirect the work going forward. So we just wanted to put that on record. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. This is general public comment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted, for your information, I just wanted to highlight some of the progress that's being made towards a new version of the Federal Voting System Certification Guidelines, what are known as the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, or in this case, VVSG 2.0. Just as a review, the most recently approved version of the VVSG is version 1.1, which was adopted by the EAC in 2015. California's standards for independent approval of voting systems are based on a draft version of VVSG 1.1. VVSG 2.0 is being developed with two significant innovations. It is in part being crowdsourced through public working groups managed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and it is also being significantly restructured to make its maintenance and further development more agile and more nimble. The public working groups have been successful in allowing upfront constructive perspectives from diverse stakeholders with relevant expertise, rather than getting that information as critiques later on. The restructuring will greatly reduce the size of the VVSG proper, since with 2.0 it will only cover high-level principles and guidelines. The detailed requirements, testing, procedures, and assertions, and related standards that used to be in the VVSG will now instead be put in separate documents. Again, this is being done to facilitate quicker adoption of updates in smaller pieces and on an incremental basis. The 2.0 high-level principles and guidelines took their first step towards official adoption last week and are being targeted for adoption by the EAC in the second quarter of 2018. Of course, having just the principles and guidelines isn't enough to start testing, so having a sufficient set of supporting material, requirements and testing assertions and that sort of thing could take another 1 to 3 years, with the earliest certifications likely being given no earlier than 2020. Similarly, getting approvals based only on California testing using standards derived from VVSG 2.0 is unlikely to happen before 2020. Finally, I'll note that while common data formats for interoperable exchange of election data are being developed and have started some pilot uses, the VVSG 2.0 is not expected to support independent certification of interoperable components. Testing of voting system-specific components only in the context of a monolithic system appear to continue to be the norm for some time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curry, and I appreciate the summary. It's very useful.
Good evening. My name is Mirka Morales, San Francisco resident. My comments are regarding a bill that just passed in Sacramento called AB 840. late amendments were introduced in a rush manner that did not permit proper and thorough discussion, and in my view and in the view of many other election integrity advocates, this bill weakens the mandatory 1% post-election audits required in California. The new changes to Section 15360 of the Election Code make it legal to exclude valid but not yet processed vote-by-mail ballots and valid provisional ballots from the audit. Registrars need to count 1% of all valid ballots, period. If they are unable to do so because of cost or time constraints, allowing registrars discretion is not the way to resolve those specific issues. The 1% audit is an important tool to detect machine tally discrepancies against hand-counted paper ballot tallies, often the only human verification in the tallying process. In 2016, San Diego ROV Michael Vu was caught conducting audits improperly. Not the first time he has been caught in what some view as election fraud. His staff at his previous job in Ohio was convicted of pre-sorting ballots to ensure audits would match. AB 840 legalizes lazy or corrupt behavior by registrars, which makes the passing of this bill extra unsavory. Election audits must be made stronger, not weaker. This is a very short-sighted legislation that can be described as leaving the back door open. I hope SF Elections will issue clarity on how it plans on conducting its 1% tallies in a manner that assures voters that the election system is being protected at all stages of counting. And I'll provide links to the Secretary about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. Also, I'm going to be saying a few words about that bill during agenda item number 5. Any further members of the public? Seeing none, next item.
Item 3, open source voting. Discussion and possible action regarding the City and County of San Francisco's open source voting system project in 3 parts, A, B, and C, Commissioners' reports, Technical Advisory Committee report, Director's report.
Okay, I just want to report a couple of quick things. One is that the San Francisco Chronicle wrote a nice article about the open source voting system project. I want to say that it was published a week after our last commission meeting. I'm not quite sure, but there's a copy of the article in the agenda packet for tomorrow's TAC meeting. And the other thing I want to report is that I spoke in Los Angeles at the annual conference of the Election Center about the open source voting project. I don't believe I mentioned what, actually, did I report on this at the last meeting?
I mentioned
okay.
you were going.
Orange County?
Yeah. Okay, so that's all I have to report. Anyone else?
For the local election in San Mateo County that's coming up, I will be working that election on election day. I don't know in which capacity, but some all-day capacity.
And Commissioner Donaldson, did BOPEC discuss the open source voting project?
Sure, we can cover it here. So at that meeting, the discussion around the open source voting project primarily had to do with the status of the contracting initiative and where that was at. And we learned at that point that basically what we'd heard at the prior election commission meeting, that there was conversations going on with the prospective awardee of the contract, the candidate, and that would be then reviewed at the Civil Service Advisory Commission meeting, which took place September 18th, 2 days ago.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, let's move on to the Technical Advisory Committee report section. Do we have a representative of the advisory committee here today? Okay, this is, yeah, we have Member Wasserman and also Member Katu. Thank you for coming. So Mr. Wasserman's going to just give an update on the activities.
Yeah, so good evening. I think that I want to follow on with Commissioner Donaldson's report. I think as a committee, we are just getting started and trying to scope the parameters of what kind of advice we can reasonably offer to both this commission and to eventually the winning bidders who are selected to do the work. So I think that we know how to contact this commission, and obviously the overlapping membership of President Jordanek makes that easy. But we have spent, I think, a little bit of time wondering about how we can provide advice to the chosen vendors, both in this early stage and throughout. The other topic that you have probably read, because I think the minutes and the committee recommendations are in your packet, but we're thinking about kind of the process by which we will get from the current state to the eventual state. And that involves some questions for which there are, at the moment, no clear answers. One of them has to do with the transition process and the availability of, if the open source voting is built as a series of components rather than as a monolithic system, which we all feel is a good strategy, then at some point there needs to be an interface between these new open source components and the existing system. And so that's one of the technical questions that needs some further exploration. And then just the overall question of the process of how we can advise the commission on whether, which steps can be carried out and in which order. There are other members on our committee who are much more knowledgeable about voting systems than I am, having had a lot of experience. But these are the issues that we're discussing, and we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night where I expect these items will come up again, judging from the agenda. Let me stop there, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that I might be able to.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, I guess, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And so, I'm not sure you mentioned this, but the text first written report is a part of the agenda packet today, which was part of the bylaws of the committee to provide such reports.
Yeah, I did have one question. I noticed in the report that part of the work is going to develop and be embodied in I think it was described as a living document, some sort of online document. I was pleased to see that, but just curious to see, curious to read it, because I thought that was one of the concerns with having the TAC be a body subject to the Sunshine Act, was that, that the body wouldn't be able to sort of work in between meetings. And so just curious how that came about and what the thinking and analysis there was.
Yeah, did you want to say something to that before I speak? Or
If you would like to go ahead, please do.
Okay.
I will be here as backup.
All right, thank you. So the idea there was to, it was more to provide a way, number one, visibility into the document, and primarily to provide an easy way for members of the public to provide feedback on the document. So between meetings, members of the public could submit proposals to change the text, but the committee itself won't be working on the document between meetings. Like in each meeting, we will approve changes that will then be added to it. So does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, let's move on to the director's report sub-item.
Yeah, so on Monday, the Civil Service Commission ratified the personal service contract that which will allow the department to enter a contract with Slalom Consulting. Again, the Civil Service Commission does not approve the actual contract or the terms of the contract. The Civil Service Commission approves that city employees, that it's better for the city to contract with a consultant in this instance, since there are no city employees currently undertaking similar work. So the idea is that departments don't take work away from employees of the city when entering personal services contract. So the PSC was ratified on Monday. As far as the contract is concerned, there are still some outstanding terms in the agreement that have to be resolved. I don't think that they're large issues to resolve. I think it's something we can get through. Then the description of the project plan and the description of the deliverables, which is Appendix A, which is part of the RFP. We're pretty much through that as well, so that'll be done quickly, I think. And then already, just the conversations around the description of the project plan, description of the deliverables. Slalom's getting an idea of the project and what they have to do as far as providing information to the city in relation to the RFP and the scope of work that's contained in the RFP. I guess after we do finalize the agreement, I'll have to sign it. The city attorney's office, Josh, will have to sign it. Then the final step would be that the Office of Contract Administration has to also approve the contract. So there's some more process around that. Nothing like what we've seen regarding the city's procurement processes. But we're already in the beginning stages of the business case, getting a sense of first steps. But the contract itself has not been finalized. There has been no signatures on the signatures page. So that's where we are on that.
Okay, thank you, Director Arntz. I have just two quick questions. Number one, Mr. Wasserman had asked about this is something that I also discussed with you, whether there would be interaction between the contractor and the advisory committee. How would you see that?
Yeah, I haven't sat down with Slalom to discuss that particular item. But yeah, I'm sure they're going to be canvassing for information regarding the potential system. So, as we discussed, certainly I'll point them in this direction. So. Okay,
thank you. And the second part of my question is, it's a question that everyone's going to ask, so I might as well ask. What do you think the date would be that the contract would be finalized? That's in a couple weeks or a month or?
As far as the finalization of the contract is concerned in relation to the department and Slalom, I think end of next week we ought to be able to get through everything. And then as far as Office of Contract Administration, OCA is concerned, it may take a week or so for them to actually sign off on the contract. But I'll see if I can't get that sped up. But as I said, even before the OCA signed off on the contract, Slalom is already getting a sense of the parameters of the work that they'll undertake. And looking at the RFP closely to get a sense of what the city is expecting from the business case. So everything won't be tied up probably in 2 weeks, but as far as the procurement process is concerned, but I think work will begin here fairly quickly. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, a couple items. One is that I haven't had at this point, I don't know if the RFP is available or the response is available online as yet, if it's been immediately available. That's not until the contract is signed. But as you're talking with them and negotiating final specifics on the contract, I would just ask that we assure that there's an opportunity for public review of a draft final report before it is finalized. Perhaps that's already in there, but I just want to make sure that absolutely is something that we can do. So also, anything and concerns about directing the content towards any subsequent contractors could be detected by those that might want to look at it. Also in the interest of transparency in an open source project. The other question I had or the question I had was also about this 1823 position. So it remains open, and you're talking about reopening. So what is the status of that? Have you by reopening, what does that mean? Is it expired and you have to reopen it, or?
So the position is still available to fill. I'm not going to fill it now. I went through, I think, 20 interviews with prospective candidates. I didn't find a candidate that I thought could fill the position at this time. So I'll write the RFP for the replacement system, and I'll have to write an RFP also for the remote accessible vote by mail system. Then in January, I'll come back to it again, and then any work in relation to the replacement system, and also any work in relation to possibly drafting RFPs for an open source system, and the 1823 ideally can come on board and help with that work.
So you're basically, you could hire somebody, but you're not actively looking at this point. Would that be?
Yeah, instead
way to summarize that?
of going through more interviews at this time, I'm gonna do the work myself, and then in January I'll open it up again, because right now it take me as much time to train someone and coach someone through the RFP process and review the work than for me just to do it myself. And once the RFP is issued, and then the responses are coming in, that's probably an easier time for someone to come in and actually be productive in that position. Because right now, someone would have to be expert at preparing and drafting RFPs under the city's procurement processes and requirements. And I learn every time I do it, I learn something new. And to bring someone in, I don't see time being saved by having someone come in and train them to do it. So, and also to be checking the work. I'll essentially be writing it again myself anyway, I expect, if someone were to try to do it themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's open it up to public comment. I also want to mention, just for the record, that Commissioner Rowe arrived at 6:19 p.m. During this item. Sure.
So when I reviewed an early draft of that job specification, it seemed to me that the salary was extremely low compared to the going rate for professionals here in the Bay Area. And maybe it's in line with San Francisco's salary levels, but for government. But I think that will be a challenge in trying to find a highly qualified person at the posted salary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wasserman.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Orange, staff. My name is Alec Bash. I first got involved in this open source effort about 10 years ago when I was concerned about the potential for hacking in the elections, but I'm also quite concerned as a former city employee with efficiency within city government, and I worked hard for that during my approximately 30 years with the city. And I have always seen the open source project as being a way to hopefully bring down the cost of procuring election systems for every election. But secondly, and probably most important, just as offering better protection against hacking of elections, which has been a major concern of mine since I first went to Florida for John Kerry in 2004 in the aftermath of the 2000 butterfly ballot election. And it has always been our hope that with the San Francisco Bay Area being the center of tech savviness within the country, that we'd be able to come up with something fairly quickly here. And of course, I understand the city moves with all deliberate speed. And I do want to commend Director Orange for determining that it would be most efficient to proceed with his drafting the RFP, working in conjunction with the consultants, I assume, and thank you for that extra effort on your part. I had hoped that we would have a system in place well before the 2020 elections for the next time we have our president come up again before the country. I don't know if that's going to be possible at the timetable that we're on now. We're about 15 months since July 1st, when we entered the fiscal year that provided the funds for this, and we are making progress, and I just would like to urge you to do all you can to continue that process, expedite it whenever possible, to do the best you can to have a system that is not only something that would be highly desirable for San Francisco from a efficiency and cost-cutting point of view, but also from the standpoint of providing greater, although not perfect, security against election hacking. We know that the Russians are very skilled at this. We know we'll be confronting them in future elections also. Who knows what this past election would have been had they not gotten involved. But thank you for your attention, your time, your consideration, and your service to the city and its people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Besh.
Hello, Commissioners. Brent Turner, to sort of follow on to Mr. Bash's statement. As many of you know, the groups that I've represented since 2003 pioneered this work nationally, starting in 2000. And in 2007, 2008, we came before the city with the hope of getting the Sequoia contract at that time, I believe it was, negated, and unfortunately we went back into contract. Sequoia at that time, I don't know, Dominion, the names, they keep changing their names, it all sort of blurs in. The point being that now, we were hopeful 2018 would be the time that we would be able to have these proper systems in place so that the country could take note, and that we would have proper systems in place for the national security by the 2020 election. Now, of course, since this is the leading project in the country, and as I mentioned, the Texas projects and the Los Angeles projects have been co-opted by Microsoft and others, that leaves us as the tip of the spear. And having this one move to 2020, even if we do get it by 2020, the rest of the country won't be able to follow suit. So we're hopeful about 2020. It's a shame that we didn't get it sooner. Regarding slalom, there's been allegations as the pioneers of this work, and we've worked pro bono on this now for 17 years, that we're doing this as some method to make money. Obviously, that's laughable. And on that point, what I would say is that if there's any way that the people that have actually created systems, like Dr. Gilbert with the system in New Hampshire, or Alan Deckert, or Brian Fox, people that know how to do this stuff, if they can be consulted or be helpful to slalom, they're glad to do that. Of course, if they're the only people that can actually build the system, which I suspect, because they're the only people that have successfully built a system previous, then there is some concern that by giving advice to slalom, they might be disqualified from taking part in the phase 2. But aside from that caveat, they're more than available and on duty, as I keep repeating, to help the county move this forward, as the national security is really the essence. And, if they can be helpful, please let me know or let them know. They keep reiterating that they are available to help not only the Citizens Advisory Commission move forward, but the Department of Elections, or now Slalom. We do also note, in conclusion, that Slalom has previously been involved with Microsoft, and we're hopeful that that is not an indication of a predisposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
I just feel obliged to say something just from my interest as a historian in these systems, that historically the computerized vote counting emerged in the 1960s, 1970s, because there was demand for instant results. Prior to that, 30s, 40s, 20s, it would take weeks to count votes. But right now, with ranked choice voting in San Francisco and Oakland, we are seeing delayed times to announce the results. And the voters that I've spoken to seem suspicious when those results are not immediately available. However, that is actually the weakness of the system from a good old-fashioned hand count I've consulted with Dr. Peter Naumann of the Stanford Research Institute. He says basically there is no complete system that cannot be hacked. And I would simply say, keep it simple. Don't try to do too much, and don't try to do something if it doesn't really need to be done. We don't need a full-fledged object-oriented language. You can use a simple functional language, for example, like Haskell, and then keep the machines separate. But just don't try to be everything to everyone. And maybe San Francisco, with our complex system, with our overly long ballot, isn't the first place to do this. Do it in some place where there's one ballot, one very simple vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. I just want to share some perspectives about the open source project by looking at some very simple, informal project plans and see if we can maybe get one of them here. This is kind of a view of the project from the perspective of late 2015 when the Commission was considering adopting its open source policy. The window for development here was kind of determined in part by working backwards from the target dates for a full implementation and forwards from the budget cycle in early 2016. This is a plan from a perspective of what a schedule might need to be in order to conform with the policy, rather than a plan of what was likely to actually be accomplished or what was promised to be accomplished. As you can see, from the perspective of late 2015, where we are right now, we'd expect to be about halfway through a development process. Not there yet. Instead, where we actually are is something that looks a little bit more like this. This is kind of the outlook since about the first of the year, that it's going to be, development won't really start until maybe at best mid-2018. And the window for doing some of the later stages doesn't shrink accordingly. And so the question is, what is this project really likely to end up looking at based on our experience so far? And it's my experience with project planning is if it's taking you 5 times longer to get started, it's maybe not unreasonable to start thinking about the rest of the phase is going to take quite a bit longer. And so rather than a 4 to 5 year project, you've got maybe a 16 to 25 year project. And what I'm showing here is maybe a little bit on the optimistic side, but it's a concern of mine about where we are headed and where we might end up. And so finally, one of my concerns also is that we may be actually getting closer and closer to a situation where we finish this project much earlier and we end up with a project that ends up like that. So in general, I think looking at project plans, having project plans is just a really fundamental part of running projects. I encourage the Elections Commission, the department, to start using them for this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr.
We're still on topic 3, item 3?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to, sorry, I'm a little late here. I'm going to just sneak in a little comment on open source voting, which is that Chris is going to be speaking at a conference that the Voting Rights Task Force is holding in Berkeley on October 7th and 8th. He will be talking about open source. And it is at the Berkeley Senior Center, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we will have somebody from Free and Fair there also. And we hope that you can make it. It's going to be a 2-day conference, and we are bringing in an all-star cast for this from across the country. New York, Michigan, Wisconsin, Colorado, Arizona. And if you go to nvrtf.org, our brand new website may be up now. I'm not quite sure what's going to come up tonight, or at least look at it tomorrow, and we'll have a lot more information, but it'll give you some basic information there. nbrtf.org. I hope to see you there, and I'm looking forward to your talking there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soper. Okay, seeing no further members of the public, is there further discussion before we move on?
I just want to thank David Carey for putting this together, and I think that we've expressed these concerns, but these kinds of concerns for slipping of the project, and software projects have a tendency to slip. But this is certainly a graphic and in more than ways than one, a graphic representation of what could happen and what I think some of us have been feeling. So I just want to point out that I at least, have a concern about time frames for this project as well.
Okay, so let's move on to the next item.
Item 4, approval of minutes of previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the August 16th, 2017 Election Commission meeting.
Is there a move to approve?
Nice job on the minutes. I move to approve.
I second.
Okay, public comment on this item? Seeing none, Commissioner discussion?
There was one minor change that it said September 19th for the Civil Services Commission. It was September 18th on the second page. It may have been actually mentioned as September 19th, and I don't recall.
Okay, Director Arntz, is it the 18th? Okay, can make that change. Any other discussion?
One other thing is that we had the resolution, and there was no actual text of the resolution in the content of the minutes. We did attach the PowerPoint. I'm okay with it being that, but it's actually not referenced in the minutes that is the text of the resolution. I don't know, it's just odd. It was odd. I reread it a couple times and I missed something, and then I realized that we were just referring to what was in the PowerPoint.
Okay,
I'm okay with that, but that seems it seems a little unusual.
Well, I think we could add that to the minutes, just attach that. It's also posted on our website, but can attach that.
I can go back to the audio and review that and see if I can get the exact language for it.
I think I think you captured, by the way, all the discussion. I think that we just kept referring to the resolution, but the resolution was actually what, as we referred to it, was what was in the PowerPoint.
Okay.
It would be good to I pull this out and maybe quote it in the content of that.
For some reason, I recall that in the motion that actually read the proposed resolution.
Well, the resolution was about a page long.
Yeah. Oh, no, not. I'm talking about the operative portion of the resolution, not the preamble and all the whereases. But I mean, I accept both of those friendly amendments and move to adopt as amended.
If I can find it, I'll add it. Okay, on that. If it's on the audio, I can add it on.
Okay, so
Or we could kick it to next time, whatever you all want.
well, so is the suggestion to change the text in addition to adding the resolution?
Yes, there was one suggestion on date, making it from 19th to 18th, and the second is adding the text of the resolution to attaching that to the minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Are those moves clear-cut enough for us to do that legally? Or do we actually need to wait for a new draft to approve the minutes? Yeah. Okay, just checking. Yeah. Then I continue my second.
Okay.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, Secretary Chan?
President Giannani,
Yes.
Vice President Paris,
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jung,
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Savant.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Okay, next item.
Item 5, Commissioners' Reports. Commissioners' reports on topics not covered by another item on this agenda. Meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities and areas of study, proposed legislation which affect elections.
Okay, there are two things I wanted to mention. First, the civil grand jury, and I think it was our last meeting, actually 2 or 3 meetings ago, we had approved a response to the civil grand jury report, and this week we received a response to our responses, and I'll forward that email on, but I think it basically says that it was an error for them to ask us at all, as well as the department, but I'll forward that email so you can read it. And secondly, the other thing I want to mention is that this is something that one of the members of the public commented on earlier. There was an assembly bill that was passed last Friday that I'm a little bit sad about, actually a little angry. This is Assembly Bill 840, and this was a bill that was introduced much earlier in the year, and the legislative season ended last Friday, but 3 weeks prior to the ending of the legislative season, and well after this bill had gone through the Assembly and Senate Elections Committees, they made a change to the language that affects how audits should be done after elections in California. And prior to this amendment, the requirement, if you were to just read the language of the Elections Code, says that all ballots must be subject to audit after an election. And what this bill changed on August 24th was to basically exempt any ballots that are counted after election night. And it looked in the numbers for San Francisco, and this would amount to a third of all ballots. So this assembly bill, it was passed on Friday, and it's going to the governor right now, would exempt from the 1% manual audit any of these ballots. And the reason is that back in 2016, a citizen filed a lawsuit against the Registrar of San Diego for not including the ballots after election night in their own audit, and the judge actually sided with the citizen and said that the registrar had to include these audits or these ballots by law. But what this late change does, it basically legalizes that behavior so that the registrar no longer has to include those ballots. So I just want to let the commission know about this. It's a topic I would like us to revisit. Oh, and the other thing I want to mention is that in the justification, the Secretary of State was saying that they're just changing the law to conform to what counties are already doing, like San Diego. But what the analysis didn't mention is that counties like San Francisco, and I have to give Director Arntz a lot of credit, he does include the ballots after election night. So this law will put a weaker standard in place, and weaker than what we currently do.
Just to be clear, is it the ballots received on election night or the ballots counted on election night?
Counted by election night. So if someone were to drop a vote by mail ballot off at the polling place, that would be exempted from the 1% audit. And what's unfortunate is that because this bill was introduced so late, there was very little time for the public to even know about it, let alone have a discussion with the legislature.
Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I'm pleased again to hear that, well, now I guess we're ahead of what the law requires, and I'm sure the department plans to stay there, but it probably makes sense for us to go ahead and put on an agenda to do a commission policy so that it's enshrined there. Not that anyone thinks Director Arntz would do differently, but it seems like a good agenda item and something we could easily do a policy to support.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay, are there further reports?
I think I said in the wrong section regarding commissioners' reports, since my previous comment was not related to the open source voting, so I apologize. But for the record, yes, once again, during San Mateo County's local election, I will be working election day.
Okay, thank you. So let's open it up to public comment on this item.
Jim Soper again. Thank you, Mr. Jadonic, for bringing up this AB 840. And bravo to Mr. Arnson San Francisco for subjecting all of the ballots to the 1% manual tally. Let me verify, or can I ask him if he doesn't have to answer, but does that include the provisionals? I understand I can't answer questions, but I'll just throw that out. Did you mention 668?
No.
AB 668 was the $450 million bond bill that was going to raise money for election equipment, and to which this commission very nimbly put in a couple of amendments to have some of that money go to open source. That bill is now in the inactive file. It didn't make it through. And I'm not sure what happens next. I think it comes up next year, but without being able to talk with the people directly, the author and so on, I don't know, but it's now in the inactive file. And so that's just for your information, because it can have a huge impact on how quickly California modernizes its election systems.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Would you mind if I asked, do you know, I think the bill, AB 668, was to put something on the ballot for June 2018.
It was supposed to be on June.
Does that mean it can no longer be on the ballot?
I don't know.
Okay, no, okay.
And the 1403 Internet Voting Bill had all of the offensive amendments or clauses removed from it. So thank you for supporting our opposition to Internet voting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Brent Turner again with California Association of Voting Officials. To provide some clarity to the previous statements and to reiterate my comments regarding Microsoft now descending upon these proceedings. California Association of Voting Officials was one of two groups that opposed 668. We did block that bill appropriately, as it was a red herring that would have set a timetable in place that would have locked in secret software corporate-owned voting systems for a 8 to 10-year supply. And of course, we did not want that. So that bill, thankfully, was put in inactive, and we appreciate that very much. In working with the governor's office, it was apparent that not only was the bill completely flawed from a security perspective, but also was flawed from a fiscal responsibility perspective. So thankfully, that bill is now inactive. Also, regarding 840, yes, it is horrible that Secretary of State Padilla continues to be so cozy with the vendors and do things for them that are convenient, but to the detriment of the general public, and we take exception to that. But let us not be confused that the 1% audit in itself is a bit of a red herring, because of course we want a different auditing system. Under the open source election system, you would have 100% audit at the precinct level previous to transportation. So we want to be clear about that as well. In keeping with some previous comments regarding the, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I mentioned to you that there is a large network of folks that are misdirecting this conversation, talking about paper trails, talking about audits, purporting to be open source proponents, but leaving open source out of their conversations. And they are all assembled, unfortunately, at the event that you've been invited to go to over in Berkeley. I would think that you might want to just go see it for that purpose, to really understand what we're up against here. But these particular folks are all assembled in one place. It would probably be good to go meet them so you know what you're dealing with. But again, it's the folks from Verified Voting and other organizations that have sucked all the grant monies, the millions of dollars, out of the country and tendered no solutions to the systems. They play a very slippery game regarding open source. They certainly don't want general public license open source, and they come in other forms, Verified Voting, OSET. They've been here in front of you, and again, I reiterate, keep your eyes wide open, because here they come. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
If I heard correctly, I heard a consensus action to discuss AB 840 at a future meeting, and I would remind that there has to be a vote taken to discuss something that is not on the previous published agenda. That stated, if this commission wished to discuss AB 840 tonight and, for example, to pass a resolution urging the governor to veto it, it could adopt an immediate consent item, as the passage of AB 840 was not known to this commission at the time that the agenda was published. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
If the commission, sorry, my name is Ron Katao. I'm another member of the Open Source Voting TAC, and one day I will get President Janonic to pronounce my name correctly. I would urge the commission that if it should discuss AB 840 or 1% audits or anything related to auditing, that I would also urge it to discuss the practice of risk limiting audits, which Colorado has recently started development on, or rather a vendor on Colorado's behalf has started development on a system for Colorado where ballots are audited until it's statistically highly improbable that the outcome of the election is wrong. So it's an adaptive audit that causes only a few hundred or so ballots to need to be examined in good cases. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which jurisdiction does this happen?
I think it's Colorado.
The state of Colorado, to my knowledge.
The entire state?
I believe so. I think President Janonic also knows more about this effort.
Thank you.
Well, I know that the state has paid a firm to write software to facilitate the audits, but I don't know if they're mandated or not across the state. Okay, any further discussion before we move on? Okay, seeing none. Next item.
Item 6, Director's Report. Director's Report on topics not covered by another item on this agenda.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to my report since I already mentioned the open source, so I can take any questions. My report.
Any questions for the director?
Director Arntz, just wondering, and I don't recall, of course, on BOPEC we reviewed the budget, but is the item for the remote accessible vote by mail system, is that already budgeted?
Yes.
Okay. And I noticed that there's a plan to do an October RFP for that, as well as for the replacement voting system. Is there any relationship between them, or is the timing just a coincidence?
Just coincidence. Yeah. I don't know if I'll get the remote accessible vote by mail system RFP done in October. I'll try. Might be November.
So, Director Ernst, do you know this AB 668? Do you happen to know if it's too late for that to be on the ballot for June, even if they were to pick it up next year?
I mean, in its current incarnation, it's too late for it to be picked up by the legislator to place on the June ballot. However, it could be picked up for the next session. There's time, and it could be. It doesn't have to actually be 668 that is placed on the ballot. It could be reconstituted as another assembly bill. So there's many ways. If the legislator wanted to place an item on the ballot, they could find a way to do it.
But it would need to be November at the earliest.
No, it could still be June. There's
Okay.
still time.
Okay.
One other question on D3. Was that D4? D3, yeah, or 4, excuse me. The Voting Accessible Advisory Committee. Is that something that's going to be ongoing, Director Arntz? And how do you see that fitting with the open source project?
We've had a VAC for many years, so this is not something that's new. There are many voting issues that are large. The first issue that is of concern to the VAC members would be the remote accessible vote by mail system, and then also the process around the replacement system, and also another issue would be around the developing an open source system. So, and that's in conjunction with providing access to our materials, paper, hard copy, online, and also access at the polling places, not just physical access, but access to the voting process. So it encompasses more. This open source, developing an open source system is a topic. It's not the topic that this group will be informed about and providing an input on. So.
And I guess relevant to that and the accessibility, the resolution that we did adopt last month, I don't know if the relationship to this committee or anything else that might change in the future. Any thoughts on that? The resolution around the assuring that voters are informed about their accessibility options.
With the VAC, you mean? Or I don't understand.
Well, it just made me think about this. I'm just trying to figure out the relationship of some of these things. I was just wondering if that's something that goes before this group or how.
No, we did. That wasn't put before the VAC. I guess it could have. That was more. That resolution came more through Fred Neeson and Bill Hirschon from Disability Rights California, who are members of the VAC. But no, the VAC itself didn't put forward any language for that resolution.
Thank you.
Okay, let's open it up to public comment.
Yes, Brent Turner with Cavo regarding the open source remote piece that has already been developed and demonstrated by Dr. Gilbert again. So I would suggest reaching out to him and speaking with him since, again, I think he's the only person that's ever done this successfully in the United States or the world for that matter. So he's available and waiting for conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner.
Just a wider explanation about what happens to a bill. It gets put in what's called the Appropriations Committee suspense file. And the reason for that is way back in 1972, there was a law that says if there was a new election mandate that the state would reimburse the counties or the municipalities for that mandate. It goes through the Commission on State Mandates. So pretty much any change in state election law has to go through the Appropriations Committee, and the suspense file is kind of where things go to die, where the chairman of that committee can put it into the suspense file, and nobody has to take a vote that would be politically problematic for them. And in that light, to understand the audit procedures, if that was mandated by the state, it would have to go to the Commission on State Mandates. So really there is a cost savings for the state, and that is probably part of their concern. I just thought it would be useful for you to understand what the suspense file is at the legislature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Item 7, process for annual Director of Elections performance review. Discussion and possible action regarding the process for conducting the annual performance review of the Director of Elections.
Okay, so Commissioner Donaldson, you had discussed this topic at the last BOPEC meeting. Do you want to give a report?
Sure. So in the agenda packet, you'll find a memo that I wrote to the BOPEC covering some background as well as the recommendations for the appraisal cycle. Well, just going into a little detail, I guess it's in here as well, but essentially talked with our Department of HR and for the city and county, and on a referral from Deputy City Attorney, and got some insight into what the current process is. And as a result, the recommendations are essentially to move to adoption of something that basically is done across the rest of the city and county for department heads. And we can go into that process that's here, but to go over the proposal itself, it's essentially that for this cycle, to continue with what we've done before with a couple of modifications, in other words, basically the form that we've had, and then move into forward-looking to a process that matches what we have with the county for the rest of the county. That process essentially, I would say that there's a different form and things, but from a process standpoint, I think the biggest difference is that there's actually a prospective setting of goals rather than simply retrospective evaluation of the year of general topics, though those can still be put into that. So just to go through some of the other materials quickly. And I guess that just the result of that, I should say, is that at BOPEC, we voted unanimously to adopt the proposal as written. So I guess actually from there, just open it for questions.
The proposal, is that the bottom half, the whole bottom half of the page? Or-
Correct.
So for this year and for next year, that's what BOPEC recommends that we approve?
Correct.
And with respect to the change of the appraisal cycle, how would that, how does that differ from our current timing?
Sure. So the good thing is that actually that the appraisal cycle that corresponds to the city is basically now. It's a September, October, November timeframe around the new fiscal year. So it's a good time to align with that. It essentially goes through a similar process that we've had in the past, which is a self-appraisal by the director, reviewing that, and then providing the feedback against that appraisal, and then setting goals for the next year. And that through the November timeframe. So from a timing standpoint, it's good and would allow us to work with that.
Okay, so just generally, let me say thanks for reaching out to HR. It's fantastic to know that they have a process in place. I wasn't aware of that. I don't think we'd ever seen this memo that they apparently sent in October of 2016. If we were to do a motion today to try to start forward on this appraisal, this process, does this, if we just say, okay, we're adopting the bottom of the half of the page, does that include the forms that we're using, or do we need to meld that with what we had from the last motion? And you mentioned we would use our old forms. I think those may have been provided last month, but they're not here now. So I'm just trying to figure out what specifically is it that we would be moving to do so that we can actually start the process now.
So for this year, the essence is to use the evaluation form that we had with a modification that was suggested in a memo from Commissioner Jordanek, actually, to break out specific items under Section 2.3 communications. Unfortunately, we don't have that form, but there was a communication section, and point 3 was the implements commission policies. So the idea there is to actually put down policies. One specific policy we could refer to, for example, would be the open source voting project. We could add other items to that as well, but this is moving towards what we might do in the next year. The second change would be on the interviews is to not perform the interviews. This again is based on a conversation with the Department of HR. Raised the concerns that we talked about at the last commission meeting. She agreed. She also agreed a survey is a good idea, and they actually have a pilot project that they've done for an employee survey, and Commissioner Jung also forwarded some questions that very much correspond to that. However, for this cycle, it's late to do that, and so the recommendation is to not do that this cycle and look at that for the next evaluation cycle. And so other than that, the process would be unchanged and would go with the form that we had adopted March of 2016 and process.
Can I make a suggestion? I mean, it sounds like I think we could vote on what we should do for this year at tonight's meeting, but for next year, it sounds like we're going to need another meeting to kind of go through all those details.
And I'm prepared to move to approve the evaluation process for this year that is set forth in the 3 bullet points there, the second half of the page, starting with evaluation of past year's performance, including the bullet point for evaluation form, the bullet point for evaluation interviews, and the bullet point for employee survey, subject to the changes recommended by President Jordanic. And I suppose we would have to appoint President Jordanic or somebody else to identify those specific policies and distribute the form for us to use. So with those explanations, I so move.
I'll second.
Okay. Let's, before we do further discussion, let's do public comment on this item.
I have a lot to say tonight. I don't know why. I'd just like to inform the Commission of about what a couple deficiencies in the city's whistleblower ordinance, in my opinion. The first is that for violations of the Sunshine Ordinance, for example, appointed county officials, that is Article 3 officials, including the registrar, are not referred to the Ethics Commission. The other thing is that the whistleblower program that's actually run through the city services auditor has a very interesting definition of what is protected and what is not protected. Specifically, violations that cause a danger to people, but also violations of the penal code. Not violations of the elections code, not violations of the government code, not violations of the education code or the revenue and taxation code. I've always thought that's very interesting, and I'm just curious whether there are things that might be vital to the review process. Not that I have any criticism, but just from a better structural and integrity standpoint, that might not necessarily come through and come to the attention of officials, or maybe even if there's things that the staff are afraid to talk about, because they don't feel covered under the whistleblower ordinance. And those deficiencies have been discussed by Senator Kopp, among others. But I just thought you might want to be aware of those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. David Carey here. I also want to commend Commissioner Donaldson for looking to the HR department for some advice and what are maybe some of the best practices being adopted in the city on these issues. I think it is a good idea to focus on what you're doing this year and spend a little bit more time on how you might approach this for subsequent years. My sense is that while some of this looks really enticing, that it involves kind of a significant change in how you do work and how you approach things. And for something that's important, I think it's worthwhile being pretty careful about how you make changes to that. My sense is that for a group or a person who has not been used to setting performance goals that are, the acronym is SMART, that starting to do that can be very challenging. And so one of the things you might consider is starting off with that kind of approach for maybe parts of what you do in your review and your performance setting performance expectations. That there may be a lot that you're doing now that you're fairly satisfied with how well it's working, and there may be some parts where you can focus on introducing that a little bit at a time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curry. Okay, seeing no further members of the public, Commissioner discussion, response to the motion. Thank you again, Commissioner Donaldson, and the rest of the BOPEC members for all the work on this.
Absolutely. I guess I just have one question on the motion. Commissioner Rowe, you mentioned about the 2.3 and what would go into that. And so I guess just for clarification, I think what I heard you say was that there would be suggestions that what would go into this, and perhaps that would come at the next meeting?
No, I think we should just move forward now. I think my motion was to authorize President Jordanic to do that. If people want to make suggestions to him, I'm sure he'd be open to that. But let's just let him break those out and submit the forms to us so that we don't delay the process for another month. My mic isn't working.
It was. Thank you.
Yeah, so I support the motion. Are there any other comments before we take a vote?
I mean, do the specific breakouts under 2.3, does that consist of anything other than your September 6th email?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the only policies that I know of that the commission that are sort of active that have ever been discussed are, there's one that was the open source voting policy. There's the one around accessible voting systems, but that was only passed a month or two ago. And then there was one in 2008 around paper ballots. But I think really maybe the only question is whether to list the 2008 policy or not. And I mean, I'm comfortable with not including it. It seems, it does, well, I mean, I'm open to anything on that, but.
Actually, we may as well include it. It's in the news a lot these days, so.
Yeah.
And
you know,
it's
at
an
least we
ongoing,
can-
it happens every election, so I think that it is an ongoing policy that's worth continuing. Yes.
Okay, so then there would be those two policies that would be listed there. Okay. Let's, Secretary Chan?
Okay. On the motion, President Judonic,
Yes.
Vice President Paris,
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jung,
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Savant.
Yes.
The vote is unanimous.
Okay. So just one more thing on this item. Our next meeting is October 18th. That's 4 weeks from today. And I was thinking that if we want to allow ourselves to complete this in one more meeting, that between now and the next meeting, we could, fill out the evaluations of Director Arntz, and then we could collect those and then send them to someone who could then kind of read those, create a unified evaluation, and then have that ready for the next meeting. So.
Commissioner Judonic, I do
Yeah.
want to point out that the existing process does also have a section for self-appraisal by the director.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
I didn't mention
would that happen after we consolidate those or in parallel? Or?
It would be in parallel. That would be, yeah. So, the director would fill out a self-evaluation. We would all fill out evaluations. Those would be collected, sent to someone that we can settle on tonight, who would then, make a summary, and then at the next meeting, we would kind of vote on, take the unified summary, and we might want to make some tweaks to it, and then.
I'll volunteer to do that.
Thank you. No, I was not about to volunteer. I was about to say that I think it's a little ambitious to get it all done by the next meeting. The director is very, very busy right now, and he's going to have to do his self-evaluation. We all are going to have to do these evaluations, and it's going to take Commissioner Donaldson, our volunteer, a while to put that together. I also will say that, unfortunately, I'm going to miss the next meeting. I'm going to be out of town for a business conference, and I think this might be an important meeting. So if it's possible to wait until the November meeting, that would be my preference. That'll give us all a bit more time to work on it.
Certainly. Okay. That's fine with me. Okay, so then I guess what I will do is, make the changes to the form that we discussed tonight and voted on, and then, we'll just allow, a month or something or more to fill everything out.
Then I'd also request that we, in that November meeting, and perhaps Commissioner Rose thinking of this as well, as that next step for the next year, that we also have that as an agenda item, so that we look at that process and adopt that process.
Okay.
Two comments. One is, I think maybe we should wait until we've gone through this one once, and then we're going to be really focused on it. So let's maybe do those at the meeting right after we've finished the evaluation. Don't feel strongly about that, but I also wanted to say we should definitely set a date that we all have to get our evaluations to Commissioner Donaldson. I think we should do that tonight. I know from experience that those dates slip, and Commissioner Donaldson is going to have to do some haranguing of people. It just happens. So I think, whatever that next date is, we should set it now. Maybe by the next meeting, everyone here commits to having their evaluations to Commissioner Donaldson, and then if he doesn't have them before that meeting, he can publicly shame us.
It's a great suggestion.
I'll harass via my proxy, Secretary Chen.
And I'm not going to be at that meeting, so you can't shame me.
Okay, so does that sound good to everyone? Have our evaluations done by the next meeting?
Agreed.
Okay. Well, good. So let's, and thank you again, Commissioner Donaldson, for volunteering to do that. All right, so the next item, Secretary Chan.
Item 8, agenda items for future meetings.
Okay, so we've already discussed a couple items. The current evaluation, the next year's evaluation, which we'll do a little bit later in the year. And then I know we have the annual report from last year that we're going to want to do at some point. And
AB 840.
Yeah, AB 840. Is there any other ideas for things? Okay, public comment on this item?
Yes, Commissioners, again, thank you, Brent Turner with CAVO. In the future, perhaps we could get some of the folks that have been involved in the creation and deployment of actual open source systems to come and address the Commission. Dr. Gilbert is the professor at the University of Florida and deployed the system into New Hampshire, but I know sometimes he's out here with proper scheduling. He'd be glad to come down. Alan Deckert, who's known as the father of the open source voting movement, is up in Sacramento. And then Brian Fox, who is known as the creator of the Bash shell and probably the fellow with the strongest technology chops in the world of open source, is in Santa Barbara. So they are all available to you. Also, I'd be glad to present on the California Association of Voting Officials website, there's something called the Matrix, and I'd be glad to go through some interesting information that might be of service to the Commission regarding the different players in the arena of open source elections and fundraising in general on the issue of elections and election reform. And I'd be glad to go through what we coined the Matrix, which is basically a list of people, including some of the folks that testified at the Trump Commission recently in New Hampshire, Andrew Appel, Harry Hursty, and Ron Rivest, and many others that are sort of linked to this group that stems from verified voting, that take the grant money that I mentioned and have received millions of dollars in grants to no avail. So far as we know, there's been no results or solution tendered. It's just sucking all the money away. So some of these folks continue to raise their head and put on events and such. I'd be glad to go into deep explanation about those fundraising activities and some of the activities that some consider criminal, and get into detail so that it's quite clear what's going on in the space of election reform and why we have failed to progress in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner.
I'd like to call your attention to the Little Hoover Commission's investigation, hearings on voter participation in California. I believe there's one next week on September 27th. My personal view is that it's not access, it's really apathy, a fatalistic view that the system is kind of stacked and already decided. My own favorite book on this, incidentally, is Taming Democracy by Terry Booton, about the adoption of the federal constitution in Pennsylvania. I highly recommend it. It's about why people were very enthusiastic in the very first American election after the revolution and why they stopped showing up afterwards. But anyway, Little Hoover Commission, I would urge you to follow their hearings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, that concludes the meeting. The time is now 7:25 p.m. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.